Okay. Okay. So appreciate you talking to me. So can you tell us briefly about your project and what inspired you to do it?
Mhm. Yeah. So what I'm doing is this semester and spring next semester, what I'm trying to study is impact of improvisational theater, which I would call improv, on language learning, intellectual risk taking, and overall learner well-being. So I teach elementary Hindi Urdu and advanced Hindi Urdu this semester and next semester. So these are the students who would be participating in these workshops. And these workshops will be conducted by a New Delhi-based theater group over Zoom. So how I came to do this has a lot of history in my experience, but then also how piloting it last year shaped what it is going to do now. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So during the pandemic, May 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic is when I found improv because I was going crazy sitting at home by myself. Everybody was crazy because you did not know how long this pandemic is going to last and what is it going to look like when we go out. So I found improv at that time as people were creating communities online. And this was conducted over Zoom and it was presented as improv for mental health. So I attended a few of their sessions. I loved it because you had people from all over the world join in, and this was conducted in English. And then I continued to stay with this. And I don't know if you have this experience, but as a teacher, anytime I have a life experience, my teacher brain turns on if I see something that can be useful in my classes. So every time I would play an improv game, I would think about, oh, this could also work well in my language class. So I would start taking notes. And while I was preparing for the fall semester, I was also reading more on trauma-informed pedagogy because I realized, like a lot of other teachers did, that we are not going to go back to the same classrooms that we were teaching in pre-pandemic. Our students were facing the effects of COVID. We also had we were also in a political and socio-economic crisis. So students were going to have very different experiences coming into the classroom. So I was also looking for ways where we could create more joy in classroom, a more sense of community, because some of the students were going to be isolated, they were going to be on Zoom, they were not going to be in class, even though my class was going to be hybrid. And I wanted to foster a sense of community and also bring in more creativity. So improv seemed like the best way to do that to me. And also for less commonly taught languages like Hindi, you already have very few study abroad programs. And then with travel restrictions and funding cuts, it makes it even more difficult to have community engagement. So this also provided an opportunity to reimagine what community engagement could look like for a language program. So I invited these theater artists, and thankfully Vanderbilt also again offered these Vanderbilt strong faculty grants. So I applied for those, and that provided for these opportunities. So I did that with third year Hindi, and it was a great experience. It was a big success with the students. They also liked just being able to play in the language, have some spontaneity in the language, and interact with other native speakers who were not me, and just be exposed to culture in a different way. So they really liked it, and I still wanted to do more. So next semester I thought, we did this with advanced, can we do this with beginning learners? So I invited those artists again, and they did it with second semester of first year Hindi, and they conducted workshops with them. And that was amazing. And students not only were using language without hesitation, but what surprised me was how students responded to the value of improv in their confidence outside class. So students talked about, we had a lot of reflection exercises built in, and a lot of students talked about how improv allowed them the space to make mistakes without fear, or not be afraid of failure, which is so central to improv. As a recovering perfectionist, this was my was my personal learning also, but somehow I did not make that connection for my students. But I remember also one of the reflection by a student who was really shy through the 2 semesters, and he wrote in his last reflection that he learned this skill of confidence that he was able to apply for his job interviews, because in the past he would be really disappointed when a job interview would go wrong, but now he could go with more optimism and not be heartbroken if one interview didn't go well. So a lot of students talked about how improv also prepared them for failure, which I think is very interesting, especially we have our students who are really high achieving, and failure is scary. Even, I mean, for everybody, failure is scary. So to accept failure and accept uncertainty, I think is almost a gift, especially in the times that we live in. And I was also reading a report from Stress in America, which is a survey by American Psychological Association that happens every year. And in that, it reported 2020 as leading to a national mental health crisis, and talked about how 18 to 23-year-olds, 90% of them are experiencing heightened stress due to education, and COVID just made it worse. The uncertainty that was brought about by COVID exacerbated it. So to me, then it made sense to investigate, can improv have effect on learners, not just language learning, but also intellectual risk-taking and overall well-being. And I thought about intellectual risk-taking because it really talks about learners making a decision when success is not guaranteed, when there's no promise of success. So you take risks in that experience. So that's how it expanded my view of improv and my view of bringing improv to class. So I wanted to see, and now this is therefore going to be with first-year learners and third-year learners. So I want to see how that goes, because one might draw more from the comfort of, I know Hindi a little bit more than, for instance, first-year Hindi. So I want to see how it works out overall. So I'm curious about it.
Yeah. And can you remind me, Divya, how are you looking at intellectual risk-taking and confidence? How are you finding out about that?
Yeah, so this would be self-reported. So there would be self-reported surveys where learners would respond to their participation in those activities in class, but also reflections outside classroom. So this would be all self-reported. In that sense, I wouldn't define confidence and like these are the things that count as confidence. It would be perceived confidence, perceived by students.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Well, I think you told us about the impact. So, so my second question had to do with impact, but you talked about that quite a bit. So probably what I'll do is I will chop up some of your answer there, and because the way it's going to be presented is question, answer, question, answer. So I will take some of your information that where you talked about what you've observed and seeing and just going forward, and I'll put that where we asked about for one of these grants.
I'm sorry I didn't catch anything you said. I think your voice was just
okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. What recommendations do you have for others? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No. Yes. Okay. What recommendations do you have for others who would like to apply for one of these internal teaching grants?
I think one of the really big one, I think that all of us know is like plan ahead, especially because education advancement grant also requires a letter from your chair or your dean. So I think you want to give them enough notice of what you're going to do and how you're going to apply it, and just get the letter. But I think what really, like one of the things that I think is really this education advancement grant allows us to do this is to just try something new that we think would be meaningful for our learners. Because I think a lot of times we're so used to doing things and we read about approaches and we want to try them, but sometimes we do not have the resources, we do not know how to get the funding. And this, I think this opportunity just allows you to let's do this, let's find it out. We've read about it, let's study it. So I think my advice is to just, it sounds very cheesy, but it's just like, go for it. Like if you find an approach that you found other people have applied, tested, you've read about, I think just do it. I mean, in the past, I wouldn't, yeah. I don't think we always have that opportunity. So
I totally agree. Completely agree. Just apply and do so, plan it early enough you get your chair's approval. So, yeah. So just in a few sentences, could you talk about how you would describe your teaching philosophy and maybe how it relates to this project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think my teaching philosophy, I think the learners is really at the heart of my teaching philosophy. So when it comes to, for instance, even selecting course content, designing the learning activities, or even planning assessments, I think I begin with what are the needs of my learners? Why are they taking these courses? Why should they care to study Hindi Urdu when they could do so many other things? What are their motivations? How do they learn best? What are their interests? And I think that allows me to bring in material that aligns with that. So an example of this would be, for instance, 5 years ago, my courses wouldn't have a lot of social justice topics in the courses. There would be conversation, but that would be in addition to everything that we are doing. But now I design my lessons which put social justice at the center, and language learning is happening around it. So for instance, even in the first semester, when we're talking about pronunciation, we talk about, a lot of my learners are heritage learners. So we talk about pronunciation of Indian names by Americans, for instance, in an American accent. And name is such a big part of identity. So we get into the discussions of identity, and we talk about what does it mean to be, for instance, an Indian origin, American in America. So it addresses topics that are relevant to their lives. Similarly, I think when I was selecting improv for them, it wasn't so much about my interest and my love for improv. There's more about, this is a time when they could use more opportunities for creativity, more opportunities for collaboration, more opportunities for joy, as well as more opportunities to engage with the Indian community in India. So again, it's centered on what would be most useful for them in the present moment. So I think that's one. And the second is, again, focused on learners, which is to help learners develop autonomy, so that when they go out of the classroom, they have developed the skills that they can see their experiences with a new lens. So whether this is through developing critical thinking skills or even analytical linguistic skills, they would not have learned all the different ways to say something in the language. But when they hear new linguistic data, how do they approach it? How the tools that they have gained and developed in this class, how can they analyze new linguistic data to learn in that moment? Or for instance, if we had discussions around a certain topic, if they have a new experience, how would they view it given what they know from this course, from the courses that they've taken with me? So I think for me, it is really centered on the learner.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was lovely. So lovely. Well, I'm going to turn off our recording now.